art and politics come together. The latest collection on display at the Museum of the City of New York. Although this is no ordinary gallery show, it includes historical pieces dating back more than 200 years. New York with Stephanie Simons in East Harlem this morning with more on how political campaigns have evolved through the years. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning, Pat. Well, that's right. While America is looking towards November and the general election, the Museum of the City of New York is looking at the entire scope, the entire history of presidential elections. The museum is opening a brand new exhibition today, and it's called Campaigning for President, New York and the American Election. And here to tell us more about that is Sarah Henry. She is the Deputy Director and Chief Curator.
Yes, we're delighted to have you here, Stephanie, and at the Museum of the City of New York.
Tell us about this exhibition. So much stuff around us.
Yes, we have incredible campaign material that goes all the way back into the 1820s and actually back to the inauguration of George Washington, the first president of the United States, who was inaugurated, sworn in Lower Manhattan on the steps of Federal Hall.
So this exhibition has a specific look at the pivotal role New York plays in presidential politics. Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, New York is an important place to win votes. And actually for a very long time, from 1812 to 1972, New York had more electoral votes than any other state in the nation. So candidates wanted to come here to get votes. But the other thing New York was important for was providing candidates. And actually 8 presidents came from New York State, and more than 25 vice presidential and presidential candidates have come from New York. And there's a really amazing statistic that from 1868 to 1956, almost 90 years, in almost every single presidential election, there was a New Yorker running on the ticket of one of the 2 major parties, either in the number 1 or 2 spot. All but 2 elections for almost 90 years.
Wow, you know, it's an expansive exhibition. It's colorful, it's informative, but it's not all pretty. Some of this is about dirty politics. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, we think that mudslinging is a phenomenon of the present, but actually it goes back almost to the beginning of American politics. And in 1800, John Adams was already calling Thomas Jefferson names and casting aspersions on his mom. And in the exhibition, we have on view things that go back to 1828, printed materials about Andrew Jackson that were very dirty indeed, suggesting he was a warmonger or that he wanted to become the king. And then by the late 19th century, the campaign started to create products that would really cast a dark light on the opponents. Like, for example, one of the most striking objects in the exhibition is a doll of William McKinley, where he's there and he has a dress on. If you flip him upside down, there's a little African-American child under there, suggesting he was the father of an illegitimate interracial baby.
All right. Lots of intrigue here. Sarah Henry, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And for more information, people can go online to mcny.org. That is latest from East Harlem. Stephanie Simon, New York 1. Pat, back to you.
Okay, Stephanie, thank you. The art of politics takes on a whole new meaning at the Museum of the City of New York. A collection dating back decades is on display. There's a little bit of everything: campaign buttons, posters, giant cardboard cutouts, candidates of every political party. Here comes Stephanie Simons in East Harlem this morning with more on what visitors will see. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning, Pat. Well, I want to ask you what you would think if you were doing an In the Paper segment and this were the headline: Ford to City drop dead on the front of the Daily News. Yeah,
we could go back decades to, I also wanted to do a headless body and topless bar at some point as well.
Well, there's a lot here that you could cover, a lot of interesting artifacts from newspapers, buttons, there's paper dresses, really everything here at the Museum of the City of New York, part of this new exhibition, Campaigning for President, New York and the American Election. And here to tell us all about it is the curator of special exhibitions, Thomas Mellons. Thomas, thanks for being with us this morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about this headline.
Well, this headline is indeed about a low point, one would argue the nadir in New York City's history, both in terms of its finances and also in terms of its self-confidence. It was at an all-time low, and this was perhaps not without reason, because Washington at this time is turning away from New York, and this shift away from New York in a variety of ways can be seen in President Ford's decision not to run with standing Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, who was the former governor of New York, of course, but to choose instead to run with the senator from Kansas, Bob Dole. And so Washington is turning away from New York at that time.
All right, well, let's look at some other pivotal moments. 1928, Al Smith, a New Yorker and the first Catholic to run for president.
Prior to 1976, New York had been really central to New York politics for a very long time. From the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century, there's a New Yorker on the ballot in all but 2 elections. And Al Smith is, of course, as you noted, running for president in 1928. He, perhaps more than any of the New Yorkers on the ballot before or since, really represented, in a sense, personified the city, both to New Yorkers themselves and to the nation as a whole. Smith had grown up in modest circumstances on the Lower East Side. He had quit school at age 13 to help support his family, and he used to boast to a national audience that the only degree he held was from FFM, the Fulton Fish Market, where he had worked for $12 a week.
Overall, what is the message of this exhibition?
The message of this exhibition, I would say, is that if you look on the one hand at the Founding Fathers and this incredible experiment that in democracy that they imagine, and then you look at the other end of the spectrum at the buttons and the paper dresses, as you noted, and all sorts of ephemera, you might think, well, what links these two things? And I would say that what links these two things is the fact that you and I are not subjects, but we're citizens, and we have a responsibility to participate in this democracy.
All right, great. Thomas Mellons, and there is plenty to see and do here to participate. For more information, go online to mcny.org. That's the latest. Stephanie Simon, New York 1. Pat, back to you.
Stephanie, thanks.
A new exhibit takes a look at more than 2 centuries of presidential politics as seen through the eyes of New Yorkers. On display at the Museum of the City of New York in East Harlem, it contains more than 1 million political items from dozens of presidential campaigns. There are loads of advertising, election memorabilia, and other objects to look at, spanning every presidential election since George Washington took office. And there is a central focus on the city and state's constantly changing role in presidential politics. Organizers say the whole exhibit is designed not only to showcase New York's powerful position as a provider of votes and candidates, but to illustrate the public's role as a decision maker.
From 1812 to 1972, New York had more electoral votes than any other state in the nation. So candidates wanted to come here to get votes. But the other thing New York was important for was providing candidates. And actually 8 presidents came from New York State.
You and I are not subjects, but we're citizens, and we have a responsibility to participate in this democracy.
The exhibit can be seen through Election Day. For more information, you can log on to mcny.org.
While Americans are looking toward the general election in November, the Museum of the City of New York is looking back at the history of presidential campaigns in a new exhibition of never-before-seen artifacts. New York 1's Stephanie Simon takes us on a tour.
It's a snapshot of presidential politics, but it's also the history of our country. This new exhibit at the Museum of the City of New York examines presidential campaigns dating back to the Founding Fathers. It's called Campaigning for President, New York and the American Election. The buttons, posters, famous headlines, and more examine the state's unique role.
From 1812 to 1972, New York had more electoral votes than any place in the country. So it was really the biggest prize for presidential candidates. And it's also a source of candidates themselves. So an extraordinary 8 presidents came from New York, and more than 25 candidates, vice presidential and presidential. And New York really dominated the tickets from the mid-19th century to the mid-20th century.
Including President Franklin Roosevelt.
He turned to New Yorkers to really help him imagine and envision and enact the New Deal. And in some ways, the New Deal can be interpreted as a kind of New Yorkification of national policy.
And New Yorkers don't have to win to be influential. In 1972, Shirley Chisholm ran for president as a Democrat, the first African American to run for the office as a major party candidate. Of course, Hillary Clinton ran this year. Organizers say that's kept New York's agenda in the national dialogue. As for dirty politics,
sometimes it's about the character of the opponent. Sometimes it's about the family of the opponents, particularly Eleanor Roosevelt gets targeted a lot.
among the many objects on display here is this Robert F. Kennedy paper dress. Now, for those not familiar with this 1968 campaign relic, Kennedy supporters actually wore paper mini dresses during the campaign. Visitors can also cast a vote in the first presidential election in 1789. In fact, New York had no say in that contest because the state could not decide how to pick its members of the Electoral College. It's a not-so-subtle reminder that democracy is participatory. Stephanie Simon, New York 1.